Welcome back to the Pandemic Baseball Book Club. I'm Jason Turbow, and today I have the pleasure of interviewing Jon Pessah, the author of Yogi, A Life Behind the Mask, a robust examination of the complete life of perhaps the greatest catcher ever, certainly one of them. It's a thorough look at somebody who is integral to American history, and yet it certainly taught me a bunch of new things. So, Jon, welcome. It's great to talk to you.
Jason, a pleasure to be here with you.
And I guess my first question is the overarching one. Yogi stopped playing in 1963. He last managed in 1985, and he died 5 years ago. Why do we need a book about Yogi Berra right now?
Well, I'll tell you what, right now, the country could use a feel-good story, a true American dream, and Yogi epitomizes that. So that's the quick answer. The longer answer about, okay, so why Yogi? And a lot of people have asked me that question. I got the feeling in talking with people before I decided to do this book that most people knew Yogi the caricature. And you know, the guy who upstaged Aflac Duck, the guy with the Yogiisms. Yes, we know he won 10 championships. And you know, he's kind of ubiquitous. He even, you know, right up until the last year or two of his life, he was doing commercials and was at Yankee Stadium all the time. But the full breadth of his life, from depression to Medal of Freedom winner, and all the things that happened in between, I didn't think a lot of people knew. And the more I talked with people, especially as that, like, there was almost a generational cutoff line where a lot of people didn't know much about him, but people 50 and under knew almost nothing about this guy's career, the impact he had on culture, you know, on the from the beginning of television and all the things that he did. They just knew he was very famous. And I said, all right, there's a lot of material here to bring out to people on the life that is a kind of an exemplary life. And, you know, and one of the things, as a sports journalist now for 46 years, I've dealt with, you know, that one of the issues that I find most fascinating is how do people deal with their fame? And there are few people in American history who turned out to be as famous as Yogi Berra. And this is a person who stayed the same. I mean, I talked to people who knew him growing up on the Hill in St. Louis when he was 5, 6, 7 years old, all the way through his life. And the absolute repeating theme was, this is a guy who never changed. And that's unusual for people who reach any kind of celebrity, much less the kind of celebrity that Yogi achieved.
Yeah, and it's an interesting point because, and for a guy like me who grew up in the 1970s and 1980s, I think Yogi was the last best callback to a time before Mays and Mantle. Even though he played into the 60s, I associate him kind of with the time that's pictured on the cover of your book. You know, this guy right there.
Yep, 1957.
Sure, and he was, just before that time, he was overlapping with DiMaggio and Tony Lazzeri and Tommy Henrik. Those guys had played with Lou Gehrig. And so that really covers a broad swath. And even though players like Stan Musial and Warren Spahn were around into Yogi's later years, I think Yogi had a particular hold on that old-timey persona. I mean,
absolutely.
Why do you think it was?
I mean, part of it was clearly because he played in New York. Part of it was 17 full seasons with the Yankees. He was in the World Series 14 times. And the World Series back in those days, from the late 40s through the 50s and into the 60s, the top three sports in that era were baseball, horse racing, and boxing. And if the World Series was a Super Bowl played 4 to 7 times in the postseason, and he was in there all the time. And his career also tracked the rise of television, and so he became one of the very first television stars in America. He was on all of the variety shows, from Jackie Gleason to Perry Como to Milton Berle to, of course, the Ed Sullivan Show. He was on all the game shows. He played a brain surgeon on General Hospital. He did cameos with Doris Day and Cary Grant in one movie, and with Marilyn Monroe in another movie. He did commercials, everything from Camel cigarettes to Puss in Boots cat food. I mean, Yogi Berra was as famous of a person in that era as there was in America. So I think that's why he had that kind of lasting hold on a whole generation of people who were still, I mean, that's my generation. You know, although I didn't get to Yogi until 1960, when he was a hard-hitting platoon outfielder for the Yankees. He was my father's favorite player as a catcher, which was why my father was a catcher, which is why I started as a catcher. And my father kept telling me what an unbelievably dynamic player Yogi was as a catcher, and I never really saw that player. So it was great to go back, watch all the clips, read all the stories, talk to the people who he played against, and I came away with such a different picture that, you know, the Mount Rushmore of Yankees is Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, Joe DiMaggio, and Mickey Mantle. And I grew up as a baby boomer. You know, Mickey Mantle was every baby boomer's favorite player if you grew up in New York. By the time I finished this book, or actually before I finished this book, I started thinking that if Yogi doesn't push Mantle off that fourth spot, then there has to be five. Because that's how good of a player he was, and how important of a player he was, playing the most important position on the field.
The good news is no one has actually carved the Mount Rushmore of Yankees players, so you have an opening.
There is room. Well, you know, people think that it goes from DiMaggio to Mickey Mantle, and that's the way the Yankee PR machine operated. And that's why Yankee fans were so disappointed with Mickey Mantle, because he never was Joe DiMaggio like anyone was ever going to be Joe DiMaggio. But Yogi Berra was the best player on the best team in baseball history. From 1949, 1953, the Yankees win 5 consecutive World Series. Never done before, never done since, probably will never be done. And in those years, the last 3 years of DiMaggio's career, he's hurt one of those years. He hits 263 in his final year. He's clearly not Joe DiMaggio anymore. In 1951 is when Mantle's career starts, and he strikes out as much as he hits, and he's being booed unmercifully by Yankee fans. And the best player on that team is a guy who's hitting 25 to 30 home runs every year, knocking in 100 to 120 runs, batting 280 to 320, winning MVPs, playing an average of 141 games as a catcher, catching 20 to 22 doubleheaders, being relied on by the pitching staff to the point where he hardly ever got shook off by anyone, and playing a great defensive catcher. And so you look at it and say, how is this not one of the top 4 or 5 players of all time for the Yankees, and not one of the best, if not the best catcher?
Yeah. I mean, in many organizations, he would have been number 1. In the Yankees,
yes, absolutely.
Number 4.5.
Right.
That's funny. And so Yogi, we're going back to the reference to popular culture. If he's known for anything, it's his Yogiisms, right? By his own doing, right? He wrote his own books about it. And you touch on that, but I don't think it really plays a major part in your book. It seemed to me you used it mostly in reference kind of to service the overall perceptions about Yogi's intelligence.
Right.
What was the popular sentiment about Yogi's smarts, and how accurate was it or not?
Well, Yogi faced 2 big hurdles in his career. One was discrimination of Italian Americans, which I was surprised just how much discrimination there was in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And the other part was he was the verbal abuse for both his looks and his perceived lack of smarts. And leave the looks on the side. You can make your own decision on that. You can look at the guy and decide for yourself. But in terms of how smart of a person Yogi was, you don't play don't win 10 World Series as a catcher being dumb. You can't handle the most high-strung people on your team, being the pitching staff, unless you're really smart in how to deal with people. You don't become a fixture on the banquet circuit and on commercials and on TVs unless you're pretty bright. And he was also routinely, by the mid 50s, he is the third highest paid player in baseball behind Ted Williams and Stan Musial. Not bad company. And he held out for 2 years, and one of the reasons that he held out was he married a very smart woman, and they were Carmen, and they were a very good team, very good business team. They knew Yogi's worth, and he held out in 1950, which was the year after he got married, in 1951. And after those two holdouts, the Yankees figured they couldn't afford to keep losing their catcher for half of spring training, so they basically gave him what he wanted. And you don't get there being dumb. So I think the perception of Yogi's intelligence was off base. I think one of the things that's interesting about Yogi was Yogi had had a pretty narrow focus. I mean, he loved baseball. He loved movies. He was dedicated to his family. He was smart at business. But, I'll tell you a story that somehow didn't make it into the book because I ended up having to cut 60 pages out of this book. But in 1992, I was told this by his godson and nephew. And he was at dinner, and it was Carmen, his wife, Yogi, his son Larry, and Steve, his godson. And the phone rings. Carmen gets it, comes in and says, Yogi, it's for you. Ross Perot wants to talk to you. And Yogi says, I don't want to talk to him. And Carmen says, okay, and goes back into the kitchen and says, sorry, Yogi doesn't want to talk to you. Meanwhile, his son says, Dad, it was Ross Perot. I mean, why didn't you want to talk to him? This is in September of 1992, towards the end of the presidential race. And he goes, Ross Perot was a horrible coach for the Phillies, and back then, and I'm sure he's just as bad now, and I just don't want to talk to that guy. It was not in his frame of reference.
That's funny. There wasn't a coach named Ross Perot, was there?
There was a scout named Ross Perot, and that's, he didn't connect the time period with the certain politician who got about 20% of the vote that year.
Funny. That's funny. So I learned two big things about Yogi in this book. One was his military experience. A lot. I've known for a long time about Ted Williams' heroics in
Right.
both World War II and the Korean conflict. We talk about various ball players who have served, but somehow I never knew that Yogi not only served in World War II, I knew that part, but he participated in D-Day.
Right.
In a boat. What was his role, and how much did it affect him later in his life after the war?
Well, the role was he joined the Navy in part because he was based in Norfolk, and in Norfolk there was a big baseball team. They built a stadium. FDR wanted America to keep playing baseball. Thought that it would be good for the American spirit if they still had baseball during the war, and the commander in Norfolk pulled together an all-star team: Phil Rizzuto, Pee Wee Reese, Dom DiMaggio, Eddie Robinson, and they played an exhibition game against Yogi's minor league team. And he saw Yogi and said, "When you get drafted, I think I'm going to lose some players. So tell him you want to join the Navy." So he joins the Navy, thinking he's going to play baseball. Call never comes. He's bored out of his mind. He's in basic training. One day, there comes over the intercom, report to your platoon leader. They have something to talk to you about. And they asked for volunteers for a secret mission. Didn't even say what the secret mission was, but they told him, secret mission, you're not going to be able to tell anybody, including your parents, wives, girlfriends, anything, has to be completely secret. Yogi's hand shoots up, I'm in. And what it was there's something called a rocket boat, which was a 36-foot boat, wooden hull with a slab of metal over the top, 3 machine guns mounted on that deck, 2 rocket launchers in the back, and they were dropped off of big boats, and they were the very first line of the invasion at Normandy. And their job was to lob rockets into the machine gun nests to help the soldiers being able to storm the beach. And there were 24 of those boats. He was in one of them. He was all of 18 years old. And when the main battle was over, he had the unfortunate job of fishing dead bodies out of the English Channel. He spent 13 years in combat, several other missions, got shot in the hand, which luckily for him and for baseball fans did not ruin his baseball career, but he got a Purple Heart and didn't put in for the Purple Heart until he was on his way home because he didn't want to worry his mother. And
I think you just said he spent 13 years in combat.
I'm sorry, 13 months in combat, right. And it probably felt like 13 years. And he comes home and plays ball in New London sub base until he's discharged and war's over and he goes to play with the Yankees. How it affects him, I think it's very common. It's very rare when you hear World War II veterans talk about what happened, because what happened was just so horrific. Yogi shot down people from, running out of burning hotels that were serving as intelligence headquarters for Germans. And that was his job to, with 2 other people on manning machine guns, was to shoot the people when they came out. That was war. You witnessed so many horrific things that you just buried it. And I think that, there was one, and I didn't unfortunately put this in the book, but there's a really beautiful museum in Montclair, New Jersey, the Yogi Berra Museum. And right before it opened, a veterans group came to give him a plaque. And it was about 20 some odd World War II veterans. And they walk into the lobby, they're walking in from this way, and Yogi's walking out from the other hallway, and they meet. And before any of them say anything, they all just start crying. They just stand there and they're crying. And it's because all of those memories that just got buried for all those years, when they saw the people who with the shared experience, it just came up and it overwhelmed them. And I think that's how the war affected Yogi, like it affected so many others who served. I'll tell you a funny story about that to get out of being so somber and serious. So Bob Feller was the very first player to sign up for the war right after Pearl Harbor. And he was also in the Navy. War's over, Feller's pitching, and every time Yogi comes up, he decks him. And it's like, and Yogi is a popular guy. He's a fun guy. He's always talking to players on the field. He's always joking with them. And he can't figure out what is going on with Feller. And Feller is the hardest thrower in the game. So when he's decking you, and this is the days before you're wearing helmets, this is serious stuff. So finally he goes to Feller and he goes, "What? Why?" And he goes, "I just can't respect someone who didn't serve." He goes, "What are you talking about? I was at Normandy." Best friends after that.
That's funny. Yeah, Feller brought a lot back with him, including a scope from his gunboat that he used to steal signs from beyond the.
There you go. Right, him and the Astros.
Yeah, he was the Astros long before the Astros.
Right.
So the other thing that I picked up, my main takeaway about Yogi, was how poor he was defensively early in his career, and how tutoring from Yankees legend and Hall of Famer Bill Dickey helped him become one of the best receivers in the sport. You obviously could only go into so much detail about the specifics of that tutoring in the book, but this kind of thing speaks to me as a baseball nerd. So I have to ask, how much were you able to learn, and what specifically did Dickey do to bring Berra up to speed?
Yogi was so bad as a catcher that the pitchers begged the manager. They loved Yogi and they loved his bat. I mean, Yogi could hit from day one, but they begged Bucky Harris and then Casey Stengel not to catch Yogi because he was so bad defensively. He passed balls. He had a very strong arm, but his accuracy was so bad that he hit umpires in the head when he threw to second base. Literally hit him in the head. And he would, instead of a catcher who we all watch on television catching the ball and pulling it in to steal the strike, Yogi would stab at the ball. So he would take a strike and he would shove it out and he would get a ball, which really endeared him to the pitchers. And he had no clue how to call a game. And so at the end of the 1948 season, he plays 50 games in the outfield. The Yankees were in third place, almost overtake the Red Sox, lose the pennant on the second to last day. And Dan Daniel, who was like the legendary baseball writer in the Sporting News, writes, among many other people, but writes that we've seen the last of Yogi as a catcher. We love Yogi, but this is a great move, and we're happy, and Yogi is happy too. And Yankee management, everyone was on board with him. He was going to be the starting right fielder in 1949. Yankees end up firing Bucky Harris, bring in Casey Stengel. Stengel looks around and says that every catcher in baseball is a 240 hitter with maybe 12 home runs and 40 RBIs because their job was to handle the pitching staff. And so you accepted the fact that they weren't big hitters. If I got a guy who's a big hitter like Yogi, and I can make him into a catcher, I got to try, because now I got a huge advantage. So he brings in Bill Dickey, and Dickey takes a look at Yogi and sees all these mechanical flaws that I mentioned and some that I didn't. Like, he would set up, and why nobody told him not to do this is beyond me, but Yogi would set up about a foot to a foot and a half too far back. And so he was always getting hit with foul tips, breaking his fingers, tearing nails off his fingers. So Dickey worked 2 hours every day after practice with him, just on just every fundamental, just, you know, how to set yourself before you throw, how to block a pitch in the dirt, how to pull the ball in, how to pick off people on first base. And by the end of spring training, Dickey told the press, not only is Yogi going to be a good catcher for the Yankees, he's going to be the best catcher in the American League. And what really was unleashed was, once he was able to correct all of Yogi's mechanical flaws, Yogi had almost a photographic memory of every at-bat. And so he could tell you about an at-bat 6 years ago when Rocky Colavito came up and there was a man on second and the Yankees are up by 1 run and Whitey Ford is pitching, how they got him out. And so he went from the pitchers not wanting him to play to the pitchers relying on his knowledge of every hitter that came up, to the point where I sat down with Don Larson for a couple of hours before an old-timers game. And of course, we talked about the perfect game. And I said, so tell me about you and Yogi. He goes, I threw 97 pitches that day. Every single one was one that Yogi called. Wherever he put the glove, is what I hit. And I was in the zone, Yogi was in the zone, and we pitched a perfect game. And he used the word we. And I go, that's going from being the right fielder to he pitched, co-author of a perfect game. A pretty dramatic arc.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that also is a testament to my previous question about his intelligence.
Yes.
You remember what Rocky Colavito did 6 years before, let alone every other batter that the Yankees faced. That's remarkable.
Yeah. I mean, he had an unbelievable memory. Al Kaline told me a funny story, which I'll share. And it was one of Yogi's habits was he would bookmark you, that if something happened that caught his attention, that is the first thing he would say when he met someone. Now, obviously, the first thing he would say when he saw Jackie Robinson was, "You're out." on the steal of home in the 55 World Series, and to his dying day, when Rachel Robinson would come to the like she came to his 89th birthday party at Yogi Berra Museum, the first thing Yogi said when he saw her was he was out. And so, the thing about 1961 that a lot of people don't know, I mean, everyone associates it with the Mantle Maris home run race, and the Yankees had a great team, and there were 6 players, one of whom was Yogi Berra, who hit 20-plus home runs. But on Labor Day weekend, they were 1.5 games in front of the Detroit Tigers. And the Tigers had come in for a 3-game series, and if the Tigers sweep, they're in first place. And Al Kaline, who was a great hitter, gets up and he hits the ball. Yogi's playing left field, and he hits the ball to left. Kaline lines the ball down the left field line. And if you remember the old Yankee Stadium, like I do, the left field stands jutted out. And so if you misplayed the ball off that wall, you could play a single or a double into a triple or an inside the park home run. And Kaline, as soon as he hits the ball, says double. And he was fast. And he rounds first base, and he's headed to second base. And Yogi catches the ball perfectly off the wall, plays it absolutely perfectly, pivots, throws like a catcher, and the ball is waiting for a Kaline to slide in. And he's out. And he's stunned. And he just stands there looking at Yogi in disbelief that he got thrown out. Every time Yogi saw him after that, for the rest of their lives, he would say, "Remember that time I threw you out in '61?" That was Yogi.
It's fantastic. I mean, that also speaks to Yogi's personality and how endearing he was to other people, and that's a big aspect of your book, is Yogi's lifelong friendships. I mean, from growing up in St. Louis with Joe Garagiola to becoming close with Phil Rizzuto and others later in life. So one of my questions, I guess, is what did those tight-knit relationships mean to Yogi, and did they somehow enable him to become a better player or teammate?
I'll tell you, Yogi was, I mean, his friendship with Joe Garagiola goes back to Yogi's father, Pietro, and Garagiola's father, Giovanni. Both left Italy about a year apart. They were friends in Italy. They took different paths. They end up in St. Louis together, and they live across the street. And Joe Garagiola was always fond of saying there wasn't a day in my life where I wasn't friends with Yogi Berra. And Joe was 4 and Yogi was 5 when they both moved there. And really, really tight friends, and friends, the type of friend where you could go 3 months without talking and then call and you still feel like you were back in the neighborhood. And very, very close with Phil Rizzuto. And they did, I mean, Rizzuto was 7 years his senior and was very much of a mentor for Yogi. And they got, they were very close. But Yogi was the kind of person that when he walked into a room, people just kind of gravitated to. And he was the kind of person that made you, it's hard to quantify, but he made you feel good. And, when I would be talking to, and this is even well before I ever dreamed about doing a book about Yogi Berra. I've been around baseball all my adult life, as in this business. And you talk to baseball writers, and when they start talking about Yogi, and baseball writers, and you're one of them, baseball writers tend to be cynical. I mean, you're with the team from February until October, now sometimes into November, and and you're there every day after day, and and it's there's a lot of give and take, and there's a lot of, you see a lot of these people, and baseball writers just become more cynical than I was a sports editor for a long time than the writer of any other sport. But when they talked about Yogi, they were like little kids. And, a smile would come over their face when they started talking about, did you hear what Yogi did? How's Yogi feeling? And especially towards the end, it was like, I heard he fell. How's he doing? Is he getting better? And one of the biggest things that these writers could ever get was a Yogiism. They were like, if they got a Yogiism, it was like, a kid in a candy store, and they would be running around to everybody telling them about this great line that they just got from Yogi. So he just made people feel better, and that was really when he came back to the Yankees. It was like, walking history, walking back into a Yankee locker room that now is, after that 14-year hiatus, with his Cold War with George Steinbrenner. He walks back into the Joe Torre, Derek Jeter, Mariano Rivera Yankees, who were really successful. But this is a guy that, has rings on every finger, on both hands. And, baseball players look at, this, you've been around. I mean, baseball players look at Hall of Famers as if they walk on water. I mean, they are the best. I mean, I think there's like 18,000 people who have played baseball. I think there might be just over 300 now that are in the Hall of Fame. So you're really talking about the best of the best of the best. And but when they talk about Yogi, he's like in a separate category. And
Mount Rushmore category.
Mount Rushmore category. And I think it was his achievements, but I think it was I think his personality he was just a really likable person. And, a story that I tell a lot about this is that he was invited to a state dinner, Ronald Reagan White House. And Reagan had him at the head table. So he's with Ronald Reagan, and he's with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, and he's perfectly comfortable there. You go into the Yankee locker room during spring training when Yogi would come back as the spring training coach, and he's hanging out with the clubhouse man and the security guard, and the third string catcher and the rookie that no one's ever heard of. I mean, he was the same person with Reagan as he was with the security guard, and that's really unique.
Yeah. I mean, I think about those rings on every finger he has. He won 10 World Series as a player. He appeared in I think 4 more. He managed in a couple World Series.
Hey, 3 more rings from World Series teams when he was coach.
Oh, sure. So I mean, he obviously he was surrounded by talent when he won all those rings. But of all those Yankees who did all that winning, he won the most. And the personality you just described might go a long way toward explaining why that was.
My personal theory, when you get to, people don't understand how good the 25th guy on a baseball team is. I mean, if he was at a park with you and your friends, he would be Mickey Mantle. And he's only the 25th guy. You have to be so good to be on, to make it. And I think what separates people is their ability to concentrate. And I think one of the things that is so key in your ability to concentrate is to be relaxed. And I think that as a player and definitely as a manager, Yogi kept it light. Yogi was a fun guy. Yogi was, very upbeat. He was as a manager, he would, you'd strike out 3 times and he'd say, "Hey kid, no one's a 300 hitter every day. You'll get him tomorrow." And unlike Steinbrenner, who looked at baseball as a sprint, Yogi looked at it as a marathon. And he understood that there's going to be bad days and there's going to be good days. And if we can just, have more good days than bad days, we're going to win. And if you come to the ballpark happy, you stand a much better chance of winning than if you're and that's what made it so hard for him to manage under Steinbrenner, who I was a sports editor with writers covering the Yankees, and I felt the pressure of Steinbrenner. My writers felt the pressure of Steinbrenner, and so I can imagine what it must have been like to manage when he's firing 2 and 3 managers a year, and he's literally changing. I hired a guy named Steve Buckley. I don't know if you know Steve, but he worked for me. He worked in Tacoma. He worked for me at the Hartford Courant. Went on to be a columnist for the Boston Herald, and he asked me when I hired him in 1987. He said, "So, who should I get close with here? Who are the key guys on this team?" I said, "Steve, the way George runs his team, it doesn't matter, because there's a good chance that 12 to 15 guys on that team this year will not be back next year. And that's what was happening. And you can make an argument that in 1990, when Fay Vincent suspended George Steinbrenner, that he saved the Yankees. Because in 1990, the Yankees had the worst record since 1913. They lost 99 games. And he was running that team into the ground. And he, he was still able to do things from afar. But Gene Michael, who was a great talent judge and a terrific source on both of my books, is the first one and Yogi, just did a tremendous job reshaping that team, bringing in Paul O'Neill. And so, George comes back, and, it was, like I said, it was tough. And Yogi, that separation that he had from the Yankees,
based on his dissatisfaction with the way Steinbrenner fired him,
and which didn't happen immediately. He gets fired 16 games into the second year of his 2-year contract. And when he was fired, he told the writers, "Don't worry, you'll see me around. I'm going to come to see Dale play." And Dale Berra, his son, who played for the Pirates, had been traded to the Yankees that off season. And so his immediate reaction was not one of separation, but, "Yeah, I'll be back. I want to see Dale play." Well, he got home and he talked it over with his wife, who had no love lost for George. And, within days it was, "I'm not going back there until then." He was offered the job as manager by his good friend John McMullen, who was owner of the Houston Astros, a neighbor of his in Montclair, New Jersey. Turned it down, was the bench coach for Hal Lanier for 4 years, hung it up in 89, and from 89 until Steinbrenner apologizes in January of 99, he is estranged not only from the Yankees, but really from baseball. He's not, for the first time in his life, he's not in uniform. He's not attached to a team. And he told Ron Guidry, who I spent a long time with for this book, who really got to know Yogi in the last 25 years of Yogi's life. Yogi told him, "It was the worst 10 years of my life, that being away from baseball." And that the really interesting thing about that too is once Steinbrenner came and apologized, it was over. And they went from enemies to becoming very good friends. And also kind of an interesting character trait. I mean, he could obviously hold a grudge, but once like he said, once it was over, it was over.
Yeah. Let's talk for a moment about Yogi's heritage. You talked about his father coming over from Italy. The fact that Yogi got to fulfill his big league dreams at all was thanks to his two older brothers, whose own athletic ambitions had been stifled by their immigrant father, who never believed that baseball could be a viable career.
Correct.
How much credit did Yogi give to his brothers for that and the support they gave him with their father? And what was their relationship like in the long run?
Small correction, it was 3 brothers. He was the youngest of 4 boys. Baby of the family, even though he had a younger sister. But Yogi was, the last boy, and he really was kind of a mama's boy. I mean, him and his mother were very, very close. And to Yogi's dying day, he always claimed that his older brother Tony was the best player in the family. And Tony had offers to play from the Indians. He had other tryouts with other teams. And all the people that I talked to from the neighborhood, who by the time I talked to them were in their 90s, clearly remembered what a great player he was. Just a fast line drive hitter, unbelievable fielder, great arm. And his father said, games are for boys. You're a man. You go to work. So he passed up baseball, and he worked in a bakery his whole life. His brother Mike had tryouts with major league teams. His father said same exact thing. And he spent his whole life working in a women's shoe factory. His brother John, same story again. He said, his father says no, and he becomes a waiter and at a big restaurant in St. Louis, and then later becomes the manager of the lounge in the Phil Rizzuto Yogi Berra bowling alley in Clifton, New Jersey. and sadly passed away early at 50 of cancer. And they were a very tight-knit family. And Yogi, despite Branch Rickey telling him he wasn't going to be a ball player, despite people looking at him and saying you'll never be a great ball player, much less a major league ball player. Yogi always believed that he could play, and that's what he wanted to do. And there was a big meeting at his house with the pastor of the church, which was the center of the Italian community there, a man of great importance in the community, the principal of the school, and the head of the YMCA. And they all told Yogi that, you know what, it's great that you want to play baseball, but it really is time to go to work. They all told him it. And the brothers did step in and said, look, we think Yogi can make it. So much so that I'll just kind of a trivia point. When he was about 8 or 9 years old, they said, if you're going to make it in Major League Baseball, it would be better if you're a left-hand hitter, because Yogi was a natural right-handed hitter. So Yogi just turned around and hit left-handed from that day on. And that is how athletically gifted, in a very strange looking package. I mean, Yogi had stubby legs, torso of someone who's like 6'2", long arms, big shoulders that kind of hit his neck. Did not look like an athlete at all, but was a tremendous athlete. And he always, when you talk to him about his baseball career, he unfailingly gave credit to his brothers for his chance to do what they never had the chance to do.
It's an amazing story. And during that era, I mean, this actually played into a little bit to the Yankees anyway. The Yankees had this amazing Italian-American pipeline from the 30s all the way through the 50s. I mean, Tony Lazzeri gave way to Frankie Crissetti, to Joe DiMaggio, to Phil Rizzuto. They all preceded Berra, and after Yogi came Vic Raschi and Billy Martin. And I was thinking about this. I think with the exceptions of Roy Campanella and Carl Furillo, the Yankees fielded every great Italian player for those
decades.
Decades.
Right.
Was there a reason for that?
Well, they were good. They were good talent judges. That's for sure. And I'll tell you, I mean, you're right about Yogi's father. Did not understand baseball. Did not like his sons playing baseball. And I think the only thing that helped when he signed with the Yankees was that Joe DiMaggio played for the Yankees and Phil Rizzuto played for the Yankees. And so there were the Italian players, and so he felt more comfortable. But to tell you what the discrimination was like, there was a picture that ran in the St. Louis papers, and I can't quote exactly the caption, but it was a picture of Joe DiMaggio, Yogi Berra, and Phil Rizzuto. And the caption all but said, look, here's 3 Italians that haven't killed anybody. Because, of course, the whole thing with the Al Capone and the mafia, and then, of course, the war certainly didn't help at all. And in fact, Yogi's parents, I mean, the Hill is the Italian section it's the Italian quarter of Little Italy of St. Louis. And when Italy declared war, the FBI went door to door, interviewing all of the families, making sure that their loyalties were to the United States, not to Mussolini. And so they were all under suspicion. I didn't know that there was internment camps for Italians. There was 1,600 Italians in internment camps during the war, and which completely surprised me. There was a famous opera star who was arrested and sent to Ellis Island and kept for 2 months. And I don't remember Enzo. I can't remember his name. Probably wouldn't resonate with most people listening now, but he's a big star. And scared the hell out of Italian Americans, figuring if this guy could be arrested and he's this famous, then we're all in trouble here. And this is the kind of atmosphere that Yogi and other Italians grew up in. And Yogi's first manager was a guy named Shecky Kane, and who managed him in Norfolk, Virginia. Piedmont League, Class C ball, and minor leagues, the stands are just about on top of the field. So people are heckling you. You hear every single word. And Yogi is getting heckled horribly. And Kane is watching him come back, beat Reds, almost like what you think of Mickey Mantle, slamming the bat into the bat rack. I mean, just really angry. And Kane, after like watching this for a couple of weeks, took him aside and said, look, you're really good. You're going to get heckled. And it's going to be especially bad because you're Italian. And that story really took me back. Like, wow, I just didn't realize. I mean, he played in 1946 in the International League with Jackie Robinson, who they ended up being very good friends. He obviously saw what Robinson went through in 46 in the International League, which was nothing like he went through in 1947 once he got into the major leagues. And he could identify it wasn't nearly as bad as what Jackie went through, but Italian Americans went through a lot of discrimination. And, what really amazed me about Yogi was, given all of the things that I've talked about like that this is a guy who comes out of it not bitter or angry, but comes out as a sweetheart. And just, flipped it around and going, I'm going to treat people the way I want to be, I want them to treat me. And it could have easily flipped the other way.
Yeah. I mean, if he can come out of D-Day as a sweetheart, he can probably come out of anything as a sweetheart.
Exactly.
Amazing. So I'll wrap this up with an overarching question that will give you lots of latitude in how you answer it. What did you learn about Yogi during this process that you did not already know?
I learned that there were two Yogi Berras, that the guy on the field, well, first of all, I learned that he was a much better player than I thought he was. And I already thought he was a good player. But that he was, the image of Yogi Berra on the field and on television and on commercials is a guy who is talkative, who is glib, who is funny. And on the field, Yogi was famous for running conversation with the umpires, always talking to the players. Where are we going out to eat after? How was the family? Just constantly talking to them. Off the field, Yogi was quiet, almost to the point of being shy. And I talked to people from again, from when he was a kid through playing baseball to his friends in Montclair. It was consistent for the entirety of his 90 years that away from off the ball field, Yogi was a quiet, unassuming, almost shy person who would answer questions in one or two sentences, if that, and sharp listener, knew like we talked before, intelligent, but really, really quiet, which really, really surprised me.
Interesting. It's been a fabulous conversation, Jon. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I can talk about Yogi all day, as you can see.
I'm sure, as you've done many times leading up to this conversation.
Right.
Again, the book is Yogi, A Life Behind the Mask. Well worth the read. You can, if you're looking at this on the website, you can click right up there on our books link. You can buy it directly from the website. Thank you so much for coming on, and good luck with the rest of this run for you.
Jason, thanks so much. It's been a lot of fun.